Lobbying.
An astonishing amount of money was spent on lobbying.
In 2023, $4.2 billion was spent trying to change America's laws. Not through elections, not through protests, not through the courts, through lobbying. And here's the wild part. It's completely legal. But how did it get legal? And who decided that? Today, we're going all the way back, from 1792 to the modern day, to trace how lobbying became one of the most powerful, most controversial, and most misunderstood forces in American democracy. Let me start with something you probably didn't think twice about as a kid: school lunch. And that little carton of milk sitting next to your tray. Now, why is milk there? The official answer? Health, strong bones, good nutrition. The real answer? Lobbying. Milk has been a mandatory part of the U.S. National School Lunch Program since the 1940s. And despite decades of heavy promotion of cow's milk as essential for children's health, the science tells a very different story. More than half of Americans are lactose intolerant. Milk is one of the most common food allergies in American children under 16, and some studies have linked excessive dairy consumption to increased risks of cancer, diabetes, and obesity. Europe, where similar levels of lactose intolerance exist, doesn't mandate milk in school lunches the way America does. So why does the US still do it? Because the dairy industry spent decades lobbying the government to make it happen, and keep it that way. This is your first clue into how lobbying actually works in America. Many things we consider normal or healthy or just the way things are didn't happen naturally. They were engineered by powerful industries with deep pockets and longer memories. Now, before we go further, let's get one thing straight, because people confuse these two all the time. Bribery is when you directly pay a public official to get a specific outcome. You hand a politician an envelope of cash. They vote the way you want. That's bribery, and it's illegal. Lobbying is different. It's influencing power, not buying it directly. A lobbyist doesn't walk into a senator's office with a briefcase full of money. Instead, they fund studies and surveys that support their industry's position, run massive media campaigns to shape public opinion, organize large coalitions that signal voter support. Hint, not promise, that campaign donations may follow if a politician plays ball. See the difference? It's subtle, deliberately subtle. Bribery says, vote yes, here's $50,000. Lobbying says, Senator, the data shows your voters strongly support this bill, and our members are very engaged heading into your re-election cycle. Same goal, very different legal standing. And that's exactly why lobbying has survived for over 200 years in America. It always stays just on the right side of the law. Most people think of lobbying as a modern phenomenon, something that got out of hand in the last 50 years. But here's the historical twist. Lobbying in America is older than the Constitution itself. As early as 1792, just 3 years after George Washington became president, we have documented records of organized groups trying to influence government decisions. These weren't shadowy corporate villains. They were merchants, landowners, veterans, people with interests they wanted protected. By the 1830s, the word lobbyist had entered the American vocabulary. Named, it's said, after the lobbies of government buildings where these individuals would linger, waiting to catch politicians on their way in or out. For over a century, all of this happened with almost zero regulation. No registration, no disclosure, no rules. Just influence, money, and access, operating in the shadows. Then came World War II, and a very specific threat. American intelligence discovered that Nazi-backed lobbying groups were actively trying to influence U.S. politicians. The government's response? The Foreign Agents Registration Act of 1938, the first federal law requiring foreign lobbyists to register and disclose their activities. Shortly after, the Lobbying Registration Act followed, attempting to bring some transparency to domestic lobbying as well. But transparency without enforcement? It meant very little. The real turning point came in the 1990s, with one of the most embarrassing lobbying scandals in American history. A company called the Wedtech Corporation, a defense contractor, exploited loopholes in lobbying laws to essentially bribe politicians into awarding them lucrative government contracts. They hid their lobbying activities on required federal forms. They paid off officials, and they got away with it for years because the laws were vague enough to let them. When the scandal finally broke, it sent shockwaves through Washington. The result was the Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995, a sweeping reform that required lobbyists to register officially and report exactly who they were working for and how much they were being paid. But even that wasn't enough. Fast forward to 2007, in the aftermath of yet more corruption scandals, and Congress passed what might be the most ironically named piece of legislation in American history, the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act. You can't make this stuff up. This act required lobbyists to file disclosure reports more frequently. It also restricted the gifts, meals, and favors that lobbyists could shower on members of Congress and their staff, an attempt to reduce the informal influence that money and hospitality had always bought. Did it work? That's where things get complicated. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people don't want to hear. Lobbying isn't purely evil. I know. Stay with me. The instinct is to say, ban it. It's corruption by another name. And that's a completely understandable reaction when you see billion-dollar industries shaping laws to protect their profits at the expense of public health, like that milk example we started with. But lobbying is actually protected under the First Amendment, specifically the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And that protection exists for good reason, because lobbying isn't just for corporations. Civil rights organizations lobby, environmental groups lobby, veterans associations lobby, disability advocates lobby, small farmers lobby. For many of these groups without money, without political connections, without media platforms, lobbying is the only meaningful way to get their concerns in front of lawmakers. It's how minority voices get amplified in a system that might otherwise ignore them. Lobbying also plays an educational role in government. Legislators can't be experts on everything. Lobbyists, even self-interested ones, often provide technical knowledge that helps senators understand complex legislation. So the system isn't simply broken, it's imbalanced. The foundation of lobbying, giving organized groups a voice, is genuinely democratic. The problem is that access to that foundation is not equal. A corporation with a $50 million lobbying budget can hire dozens of former politicians and policy experts to work the halls of Congress full-time. A grassroots citizen group can't. And that's the structural flaw at the heart of the system. So where does that leave us? $4.2 billion spent in 1 year, trying to shape the laws you live under. Lobbying gave us mandatory milk and school lunches. It gave us foreign agent registration laws born from Nazi influence operations. It gave us the hilariously named Honest Leadership Act, which still didn't stop billions from flowing into the system every year. And it gave ordinary people, environmental activists, disability advocates, veterans groups, one of the few tools they have to fight back against the powerful. The problem isn't lobbying itself. The problem is that in a system where influence costs money, those with more money will always have more influence. The milk in your child's lunchbox didn't get there by accident, and that should make you think very carefully about what else in your daily life was put there on purpose. If you found this interesting, I've got a deep dive coming up on the history of campaign finance in America, how political donations went from backroom handshakes to $1 billion industry. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think lobbying can be fixed, or is the system too far gone? See you again in next video.